We have COP21 meeting in Paris. We have air out there that you could cut up and put in a box practically today. Will you have specific targets at all for the environment? Will you have specific mandates for clean energy, clean technology, for decreasing the carbon footprint? And we understand that it's not off the table that you would fund coal-fired power plants. What about that?
You see, once the board is in place, we would certainly work with the board to produce an energy policy. And before the energy policy is produced, I find it very hard to tell you how we are going to deal with some of the very sensitive issues. For instance, coal-firing power plants or nuclear power plants, and how can we support renewable energy. I think promoting renewable energy is a default energy policy. On the other hand, we need to look at the actual need for electric power or energy in the Asian countries. For each and every person lifted out of poverty, there will be an additional unit of demand for energy power. Can you imagine when I travel in some of these poor countries, in slum areas, and I see these people, I told myself how much energy would be needed, how much power would be needed when all these poor people simply have a very decent request: take a bath every morning. What does that mean? And how are we going to meet these needs? The basic human rights for proper shelter. I think it's the responsibility of all of the members of the international community. How can we deal with the implications for the heavy pressure on natural resources? This is not an easy answer, but I think we would look at this very seriously, and we will try to strike a proper balance between meeting the needs and avoiding footprint in the environment.
On your first point about corruption, I think in London you had mentioned that you would that it was off the table to have a Chinese leader of the Integrity Department and also have a Chinese president of the bank. You said that this was needed to avoid skepticism. There's been a lot of skepticism, and it seems like that's been a pretty big part of your job, to try to convince the world that a Chinese institution can go forward with international standards. Can you talk a little bit about that element of trying to convince people?
You have to convince people, particularly when you have lots of skepticisms about your institution. I made some comments. I heard some of the critical comments on the Chinese investors overseas. These problems might be isolated cases, but some of the problems, some of the failures would adversely impact on the reputation of Chinese investment overseas. So when I talk to our European friends, since we are friends, I could be quite frank. I said, it's unfair to judge your behavior in Africa by what your ancestors did in the 18th and 19th centuries. Likewise, it's unfair to make judgments or prejudgments on the behavior of this bank just because of some of the mistakes made by some of the Chinese investors. We all make mistakes. The mistake will never truly be a mistake unless you refuse to correct it. So we should learn from the past. We should do a good thing and try to work with each other to make sure we would have net benefit to the countries which we support. And sometimes you have to manage some of the potential risks. Sometimes the risks are reputational risks. Sometimes it's the perception. But perception is the ultimate reality. If you cannot deal with perception, you cannot deal with reality. That's my position. So if AIIB is headed by a Chinese national, if the AIIB has a Chinese national as its president, I don't think the head of the integrity department should be a Chinese. Not because the Chinese are not good, not up to this job, because of the perception. And also there's possible conflict of interest. Now, if the bank is headed by the national of some other country, that country's other nationals can be, it's for obvious reasons. I don't think it's a good idea for us to do something which invite, suspicion, perception problems. Also, I said, for instance, if the bank is headed by a Chinese national, the head of the human resource department should not be a Chinese, because we would like to avoid another kind of misconceptions. So anyway, when you would like to set up a very good governance structure, you need to look at all these possible issues to make this institution truly a credible and convincing institution. Now, maybe for some time, but over the last 2 years, we have persuaded a lot of Europeans and other countries, members, that we truly want to be a multilateral institution. And I think it has worked. The proof of the pudding is certainly the eating. And I think the only way for AIIB to be truly credible institution is for this bank to implement, to run its business the way we advocated. So now we have to convince you. But I have a dream. I think what Cicero said, the Roman philosopher, he said, you don't have to convince me. Your very authority convinces. So maybe 20, 30 years later, when our authority is established, when you hear about the name of AIIB, and people will say, this is truly a great institution. And this is my dream.
One more, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience. So think of real stumpers for Mr. Jin. Today in Washington, we saw the RMB be accepted in the IMF into the SDR. This is, in many ways, we've seen the AIIB, the One Belt, One Road, the Silk Road Fund, all mentioned as, in some way, a new Marshall Plan, or it's been compared to the Marshall Plan, which in many ways was a key factor in the internationalization of the dollar some 70 or so years ago. What plans, initially I know most of your documents cite US dollars, your capitalization in US dollars. Tell us a little bit about the longer term perspective on the RMB and how you might dovetail with the Chinese effort to internationalize the RMB.
When I heard RMB would be one of the currencies in the basket of IMF, I said to all of the major shareholders, congratulations. I congratulate all these major shareholders on their wisdom. Finally, they are smart. I congratulate them because they made a good choice. RMB is a strong currency. In Chinese external relations, Chinese cross-border investment across the world certainly is appreciated very much by all its trading partners. Now, I am a Chinese national, but I'm also the President-designate of AIIB. I think it's all right for me to say or to see that China should be a country with sustainable development. And I would be very happy if Chinese currency would contribute to the regional economy, because all eyes are on the Chinese economy. They are very much worried about sustainability of the Chinese economy. So this is very much important. Once the currency becomes one of the currencies in the basket, I will say it's a huge responsibility on the part of the government to make sure that currency would be stable and the economy would be open to deserve the status of an international reserve currency. So I do hope, and I'm looking forward to the continued contribution of Chinese economy to the global economy on the basis of the sustainable economy and also stable Chinese currency. And I do believe we need to increase the assets in RMB so that people would be willing to hold RMB so that they could have RMB assets as part of their investment instruments. This bank still used the US dollar as the currency because we believe it's convenient, but we can also raise capital in the Chinese market, either in US dollars or RMB. I think in the offshore center of RMB, we can also float bonds in offshore markets, because this is very good for our bank to tap the capital market in China. With regard to the very interesting issue of One Belt, One Road, I indicated in my opening speech the connectivity in the vast landmass of Eurasia is important for Chinese economy, Chinese economy, Asian economies with European economies. We can really have a better integrated, economy. But this bank is not specifically created for One Belt, One Road. This bank is created to benefit all of the emerging market economies of its members. There are quite a number of countries which fall in the category of the countries, so they certainly deserve our support. And all of the projects which are proposed to AIIB for financing must meet the basic, I think, standards of this bank. As AIIB is owned by all of the countries, we should not overlook the need of those countries which are not part of the One Belt, One Belt Road countries. So we want to cover all of the emerging market economies. That is the distinction between One Belt, One Road or Chinese Silk Road Fund and AIIB.